Guten Tag, APUSH. We have a new video today. It's the Bee's Knees by the Big Cheese himself, Mr. Linegar. Let's make history today as we jaw over Unit 1, Day 2. But first, let's do our daily punishment. And this daily punishment is brought to you by my wife, Mrs. Linegar. Did you hear about the kidnapping? He woke up. All right, here are your key terms for today's video. Prince Henry the Navigator, Vasco da Gama, the Volta de Mar, Caravel, Carrack, the Atlantic slave trade, the Triangular trade, the Middle Passage, the Columbian Exchange, La Leyenda Negra, the Castas system, Creoles, Peninsulares, Mestizos, Zambos, Mulatos, the Pueblo Revolt, and the Encomienda system. We're going to be going over the causes of European exploration today, the Portuguese exploration, the Spanish exploration, and the effects of European Iberian exploration. Iberian is Spanish and Portuguese. So let's first start talking about Portugal. Portugal is going to explore originally to try to find a direct route to India. They were trying to get spices from India. Before this time, the Europeans had to pay. The Italians were the ones that would get the spices. Italy, right here. And Italy would trade from the Muslims, and the Muslims put a lot of taxes on that. So the Portuguese are going to try to find a way to circumnavigate Africa, which they will eventually do with Vasco da Gama to get to India directly to do the spice trade. Prince Henry the Navigator is one of the more important Portuguese kings. He's going to create new naval schools to train his Portuguese sailors. He'll adopt new technologies for Portugal. Vasco da Gama, like I mentioned, is going to be the one that goes to India. The Portuguese, with circumnavigating Africa, are going to take over parts of Africa, or at least create trading ports on parts of Africa, like in West Africa mostly, and a little bit in East Africa. And they will start selling, buying slaves from African tribes in return for guns, and they will be the forerunners of the Atlantic slave trade. Boo! The Volta de Mar is a navigational technique created by Portugal. It's how to use the wind cycle for maritime empires. It allowed the Portuguese to travel to the Indies and Africa. The caravel was a ship created in the 15th century by Portugal and later used by Spain. It used the Latin sail, which is a sail like this right here, to go directly against the wind. It's small, fast, maneuverable. The carrack is another 15th century ship used by Portugal. It's larger than the caravel. It's square-rigged. These will be the ships that will be used to explore the New World. Let us talk about Spain now. Spain will start exploring in the 1400s. Originally, Columbus thought that he would go through the Atlantic Ocean and he would get in directly to India. So, let's see. Columbus thought he would go whoop, and get there directly. He didn't realize there was another continent. Some of the goals for Spanish colonization and European colonization in general will be gold, God, and glory. The Spanish will take over the southwestern United States. At first, they took over the Caribbean, and then they took over Mexico, Peru, and South America. For the purpose of this class, they're going to be taking over the Southwest. When I say the Southwest, by the 1700s, they'll taking over Texas, California, New Mexico, Arizona, those areas. The Pope was a little bit worried that Spain and Portugal might fight over who has land in the New World. So he's going to divide the world up between the two Catholic countries, Spain and Portugal. The Pope will. That was Alexander. And he'll give Spain the Americas, except for Brazil, and he'll give Portugal Brazil, and Africa. Obviously, this is super offensive if you're a native because it's showing that he doesn't even consider them humans. We will have the Columbian Exchange during this time. The Columbian Exchange was the exchange of food products, ideas, diseases, crops, and animals from the Old World, aka Europe, to the New World, North and South America. Some of the conquistadors during this time, Hernan Cortez, who will defeat the Aztecs with around 300 soldiers, and Francisco Pizarro, who will defeat the Incans. Some Spanish people will not be happy with what Spain are doing. The Spain are going to start using the Native Americans as slaves. That's the Encomienda system. The Encomienda system allowed the Native Americans to be used like as slaves, kind of like almost serfdom, if they did not convert to Roman Catholicism. So it was kind of like a religious rationale for slavery. The Spanish also did something called the Mita system, where the Native Americans had to work in the mines for certain months of the year, in the repartimiento system. There was some honest attempts to convert the Native Americans. The Spanish will create missionaries and missions throughout the Southwest. You see a lot of them still in California, New Mexico, Arizona, and Texas. The Alamo is a mission. De las Casas was not happy with how the Spanish were treating the Native Americans. He saw all the people Columbus killed, how they enslaved the Native Americans. Some of them purposely try to get the Native Americans affected with smallpox. BTW, 90% of the Native Americans will die as a result of smallpox and diseases. So De las Casas will write letters to the King and Queen of Spain to try to treat the Native Americans more justly. Eventually, De las Casas will create an argument about how all the Spanish did, the conquistadors, was butcher and kill the Native Americans. It's a very negative portrayal. This negative portrayal of the Spanish as butchers and just like intentional murders of Native American lives and culture is called La Leyenda Negra, the Black Legend. It is simplistic because the Spanish will eventually intermarry the Native Americans. They will record some of their culture, and the missions will be a place over time to protect Native American life. But La Leyenda Negra does have a lot of truth to it. This right here is the Treaty of Tortoises. You see the land in yellow that Spain got, and the land in purple that Portugal got. Some of the end results of colonization. There will be eventually a racially based system. It's going to be mostly Spanish men that move to the New World. So there will be intermarrying. A lot of times it's rape of the Native American women and Spanish men. And you're going to get a racially based system. The people that will govern New Spain will be the whites born in Europe, the Peninsulares. Then eventually over time you'll have the whites born in America, the Creoles. Then you'll have the whites mixed with the American Indians, the mestizos. That's most Mexicans today, and most Hispanics from other Latin America countries today are mestizos. My wife and daughter are mestizos. Mestizas, excuse me. You have the whites mixed with African Americans, mulattoes. You have the American Indians mixed with the African Americans, zambos. Then you have the Native Americans at the very bottom, and then the African Americans. There will be a racially based system. There will be some revolts against Spanish colonization. One of the largest ones is the Pueblo Revolt. This is a Native American revolt in New Mexico. It's in 1680. It's going to end up killing 400 Spanish. The Pueblo will target churches during this time. They interpreted the Catholic Church as a symbol of their oppression, and they go out of their way to target churches. It will eventually be put down, but it will cause a lot of damage. Lastly, we have some global exchanges. We talked about the Columbian Exchange. The Columbian Exchange will spread to East Asia, Africa, and India with some of the new food products. They will go to eventually Asia and Africa. So like in Asia and Africa, they'll eventually start growing potatoes, sweet potatoes, peanuts. Like I mentioned before, smallpox, measles will go to the New World and will kill a large part of the Native American population, 100 million people. We'll have new food and domestic animals. Wheat, horses, cattle, sheep, goats, chickens will go to the Americas. American crops will include maize, which is corn, potatoes, beans, tomatoes, peppers, and peanuts. Eventually, this will lead to a huge increase in population globally across the whole world, from 425 million people in 1500 to 900 million by 1800. And this will help trigger eventually the second agricultural revolution. Enslaved Africans will be the largest group of migrants from 1500 to 1800. There will be a sizable migration from Europe to the Americas, which is what we're going to be talking about for the next couple of classes. And here's a picture of some of the Columbian Exchange. So let's talk a little bit about the Atlantic slave trade. We talked before about African slavery and how the Africans enslaved their enemy tribes. The European Atlantic slave trade is going to be much different. The Portuguese will trade weapons in the Gold Coast, which is West Africa, with some of the major tribes there, Oyo, Asante, Dahomey. And then the Oyo, Asante, Dahomey will capture some of their enemy tribes, and they will sell them in return for muskets, guns, and sometimes gold. They'll then use that to conquer enemy tribes. So not only are the Europeans going to create a super racist-based slavery, they're going to destabilize African governments. They're going to turn Oyo, Asante, Dahomey into like more absolute monarchies who will become aggressive and start trying to conquer their enemy tribes. There won't be a lot of women in Africa because there won't be a lot of men in Africa because it's mostly going to be the men that are sent to the New World. Because there's not that many men in Africa, Africa's going to start adopting more and more polygamy. So that's a result of Europeans. The European African slavery will be based on race. The Africans will be sent to the Americas to work in haciendas. This is called the Middle Passage. The Middle Passage is the voyage from Africa to the Americas. 1.8 million people will die in the Middle Passage. The Africans will start being used as in slavery over time. At first, it was the American Indians. But what happens is a lot of the Native Americans will die because of disease. Also, it was easier for Native Americans to escape. They looked the same. They knew the language. They knew the land. So the Native Americans will not be an effective labor source. African slaves, a lot of them were sedentary. They were in a different continent. They couldn't escape. And also they had a different colored skin. So it would be harder for them to just kind of be able to disappear into the rural areas. So by the 1600s, they're going to be starting to use a lot more slaves. In America, because we teach American history, the first slaves came in 1619 is when the first slaves will come from America to Jamestown. That's called some group of historians actually use that date and making some new historical materials for American history to focus on the negative impact of slavery. It's called the 1619 Project from New York Times people. There is going to be a whole system of trade. So like, for example, you'll have weapons being sent to Africa. They'll trade the weapons, and those weapons will eventually be sent to Africa. They'll be sold to some of the tribes, and then they will, after that, be shipped to the Americas. Then the slaves will be working in the haciendas, and the raw resources like sugar, cotton, later on tobacco, indigo, will be sent back to Europe. That is called the triangular trade. Here's a picture of a slave ship. You can see how really close they are together, the horrible conditions. And here's a picture of the triangular trade. All right, guys, that is all I have for you for today. Until next time, deuces, 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 yeah.